Scene 4. It is early the following morning. There is a confusion of street cries like a choral chant. Stella is lying down in the bedroom. Her face is serene in the early morning light. One hand rests on her belly, rounding slightly with new maternity. From the other dangles a book of coloured comics. Her eyes and lips have almost narcotized tranquility that is in the faces of Eastern idols. The table is sloppy with the remains of breakfast and the debris of the preceding night. And Stanley's gaudy pyjamas lie across the threshold of the bathroom. The outside door is slightly ajar on a sky of summer brilliance. Blanche appears at this door. She has spent a sleepless night and her appearance entirely contrasts with Stella's. She presses her knuckles nervously to her lips as she looks through the door before entering. So I think this is a significant stage direction of Williams's, and what it's establishing, as this scene will explore, first of all highlighted in blue, is the contrast between the two sisters in the aftermath of the incidents of the poker night in scene 3. Stella, looking serene, a belly rounding slightly with new maternity, with this drug-like peacefulness in her face. Her eyes and lips have a narcotized tranquility. You have the debris of the preceding night on the stage, and then Stanley's gaudy pyjamas. Remember that earlier in scene 1, Stanley was referred to as the gaudy seed bearer, and now his gaudy pyjamas lie across the threshold of the bathroom, and the pathetic fallacy of the sky of summer brilliance. What you would analyse in this is the sexual fulfillment and gratification that Stella receives in her relationship from Stanley, which rights the wrongs that we have seen in the previous scene. It's in this scene where Blanche will confront Stella about what she terms merely brutal desire. And the opening stage direction is full of these descriptions and the symbolism, the contrasting between the two sisters, the gaudy pyjamas, the drug-like tranquility which is on Stella's face, which indicate that in this play, Williams constructs the relationship between Stella and Stanley as being predicated fundamentally on the sexual dynamic. Blanche. Stella? Blanche utters a moaning cry and runs into the bedroom, throwing herself down beside Stella in a rush of hysterical tenderness. So again, the contrast between the two sisters, whereas Stella in the stage direction is stirring lazily, lying on her bed, reading a book of comics, looking almost as though she's drugged up, satisfied. Blanche is uttering a moaning cry. She's running into the bedroom. She throws herself down beside Stella, and we have a rush of hysterical tenderness. So the two sisters, in the aftermath of the events of scene 3, interpret and react to the events differently. For Blanche, there is chaos and confusion in what has occurred, whereas Stella seems to have arrived at a much more quiet acceptance, and as you'll see in the coming dialogue, is much more flippant than Blanche, looking to make excuses for Stanley, and to suggest that the situation now, having peaked in its conflict, has been resolved. "Baby, my baby sister," exclaims Blanche. And again, you see with Blanche often in this text, this sort of infantilizing of Stella. She often takes this role of the elder sibling, though famously lies to Mitch about being 5 years younger than Stella, I think in the date sequence. "Blanche, what is the matter with you?" Blanche straightens up slowly and stands beside the bed, looking down at her sister, with her knuckles pressed to her lips. So just this alone, I think, gives you that evidence. "Blanche, what is the matter with you?" says Stella, drawing away from her. And so you can see the difference with which these two sisters are now behaving after the events of scene 3. Stella attempting to flippantly suggest that the event wasn't as problematic, let's say, as Blanche is making it out to be. Blanche's hysterical tenderness and moaning cries, her exclamatives, contrast with Stella. Blanche straightens up slowly and stands beside the bed looking down at her sister with knuckles pressed to her lips. He's left. Stan? Yes. Will he be back? He's gone to get the car greased. Why? Why? Exclaims Blanche. I've been half crazy, Stella. When I found out you'd been insane enough to come back here after what happened, I started to rush in after you. To which Stella replies suggestively, I'm glad you didn't. In other words, I'm glad that you didn't rush in after me, because me and Stanley were, let's say, consummating our relationship, implying the sexual dynamic of their relationship and how sex here has solved a physical conflict in their relationship. What were you thinking of? Asks Blanche, and Stella, in return to that, just makes an indefinite gesture. Answer me, what? Please, Blanche, exclaims Stella, sit down and stop yelling. All right, Stella, I will repeat the question quietly now. How could you come back in this place last night? Why? You must have slept with him. Stella gets up in a calm and leisurely way. Blanche, I'd forgotten how excitable you are. You are making too much fuss about this. So I think, again, you're seeing here in Stella's language, her responses are quite short and crisp. She's very matter of fact. You could argue that she's almost blasé, emotionless in her reactions. She criticizes Blanche here as being excitable and then declares, you're making too much fuss about this. And just to remind you, the fuss which Blanche, I believe, is rightfully making is that Stanley first humiliated his pregnant wife in front of his drunk friends and then struck her bad enough, where in the previous scene, Stella exclaimed, I want to get away, I want to get away. Whereas here, now, you're making too much fuss about this. So those two statements of Stella's, I want to go away or get away, I want to get away, and you're making too much fuss about this, in two scenes juxtaposed next to each other, shows you that kind of binary, let's say, in her relationship with Stanley. She is attracted to the same things in Stanley, his masculinity, his drive. She's attracted to the same things in Stanley that she also sometimes often resents. You're making too much fuss about this. Am I? Yes, you are, Blanche. I know how it must have seemed to you, and I'm awful sorry it had to happen, but it wasn't anything as serious as you seem to take it. In the first place, when men are drinking and playing poker, anything can happen. It's always a powder keg. He didn't know what he was doing. He was as good as a lamb when I came back, and he's really very ashamed of himself. So I'll highlight for Stanley in green in this scene, just so that you can see when a character is speaking about Stanley. And I think what you would do with a line like this highlighted in green is you would look at the ways in which Stella basically makes excuses for Stanley, and therefore in making excuses for him justifies his behaviour. Stella is Stanley's apologist, just as in this play Stella often acts as an apologist for Blanche, making excuses for Blanche, justifying Blanche's behaviour. Here in scene 4, she acts as an apologist for Stanley. He didn't know what he was doing. The simile, as good as a lamb when I came back, and he's really very, very ashamed of himself. So you have this nice combination of techniques which is used by Williams to show you the ways in which Stella acts as that apologist for Stanley. And in the line above, when men are drinking and playing poker, anything can happen. And the metaphor, it's always a powder keg. In other words, it's a powder keg. Metaphorically, we're always on the edge of an explosion when men are drinking and playing poker. Seems to echo Mitch's sentiment from scene 3, that poker should not be played in a house with women, which, if you remember, Mitch reiterates twice in the same scene, because one of the things which Williams is suggesting through these characters' attitudes and beliefs is, even though this is a cosmopolitan, bohemian city, there is still a sort of archaic establishment of gender roles embedded in the culture of this society. And that makes it all right, asks Blanche. No, it isn't all right for anybody to make such a terrible row, but people do sometimes. Stanley's always smashed things. Why, on our wedding night, soon as we came in here, he snatched off one of my slippers and rushed about the place, smashing the light bulbs with it. He did what? He smashed all the light bulbs with the heel of my slipper. She laughs. So just before we talk about the smashing of the light bulbs with the slipper, I just want to point out here in Stella's dialogue, the line, it isn't all right for anybody to make such a terrible row, but people do sometimes. Later in the play, Blanche will declare, I believe it's in scene 9, to Mitch, that she doesn't want realism, she wants magic. Stella, however, I think, is more of an embodiment of the spirit of pragmatism and realism. Stella is very pragmatic in her relationship with Stanley. Stella is willing to compromise. She understands that in life, one must make compromises and learn to deal with the hand that they are dealt. So this notion that it's not okay for somebody to make a terrible row, but people do sometimes, shows you that sense in Stella's characterization, that she is willing to compromise on Stanley's behavior. Because what other option does Stella truly have? She's dependent on Stanley financially, and at the same time, Stanley, as the breadwinner, is also the patriarch of this soon-to-be family. She's pregnant with his baby, so her dependence on Stanley is even more amplified by the conditions of her life. Now, Stella moves on to talking about how Stanley, on the night of their wedding, smashed the light bulbs with her slipper. He smashed all the light bulbs with the heel of my slipper, she exclaims, and then she laughs, which is important to note because Blanche asks, you let him, didn't run, didn't scream, and you get a key quotation from Stella in response to that. I was sort of thrilled by it. I think this is an effective quotation to use for Stella, just as Stella pointing out that Stanley is the only one of his group of friends that's likely to get anywhere because of the drive that he has. So both Stanley's drive and this notion of Stella being thrilled by Stanley exhibiting sort of hyper-masculine, aggressive behaviour, the wildness to Stanley, which Stella seems to be thrilled by, that here is a male that cannot be contained. And in some ways, this sort of edginess to him and this wildness to him, I think is something that she is deeply attracted to. So whereas Blanche sees this as a subject, as you can see in front of you, a subject for fear, you didn't run, you didn't scream, it's actually the opposite which Stella felt in that incident. She was thrilled by Stanley. She was excited by his sort of macho behaviour. So now she switches the subject. She waits for a moment in the stage direction and then says, Eunice and you had breakfast. Do you suppose I wanted my breakfast? There's some coffee left on the stove. And Blanche acknowledges exactly what we have been talking about. You're so matter-of-fact about it, Stella. And Stella's response to Blanche embodies what we've been talking about with Stella, her pragmatism and her realism. What other can I be? So again, it's a nice exchange of dialogue between the two sisters. This is one of a number of scenes or sequences in a scene where we just get the two sisters on stage talking to one another. Even though Stanley will come into the scene slightly later, Predominantly, this is a Blanche and Stella sequence, and we've had a key Blanche and Stella sequence at the sort of tail end of scene 1 with the monologue of the loss of Belle-Reve and the death in the Dubois families. He's taken the radio to get it fixed. It didn't land on the pavement, so only one tube was smashed. And you are standing there, smiling, exclaims Blanche. Again, it's a reiteration of the idea above. She was sort of thrilled by Stanley smashing all of the light bulbs with her slipper on the eve of their wedding, on the night of their wedding, I should say. Here, she is smiling at the idea that Stanley has taken the radio to get it fixed after it was smashed. It's a deliberate repetition of the verb smashed. And once more, in the same scene, 2 pieces of evidence for how Stella is kind of attracted to Stanley's aggressiveness and this wildness to his masculinity. She stands there smiling as Blanche exclaims when she mentions the radio having been smashed the night before, and acknowledges the thrill that she felt at the smashing of the light bulbs. "What do you want me to do?" asks Stella. "Pull yourself together and face the facts." Could this possibly be the most ironic statement in the play, given the character who says this? "What do you want me to do?" asks Stella, and Blanche replies with, "Pull yourself together and face the facts." So, if you're sympathetic to Blanche's characterization as mentally unstable, you would say that there's an artlessness to this statement of Blanche's. If you're critical of Blanche, you would say that there is a hypocrisy to this statement of pulling oneself together and facing the facts. And Stella asks her, "What are the facts? What are they in your opinion?" And I'll keep stuff for Stanley highlighted in green, and you'll just have to be aware of which characters say this. And Blanche speaks openly. "In my opinion," she says, "you're married to a madman." "No. Yes, you are. Your fix is worse than mine is." So as far as Blanche is concerned, Stella's fix, Stella's situation, is even worse than hers. She's married to a madman. We've had some criticism of Stanley by Blanche in this play, in terms of his behaviour. You see a little bit of that in scene 2 and scene 3, but it's in this scene where most of Blanche's criticisms of Stanley are voiced. And Williams uses a clever conceit of theatre of having Stanley on stage disguised from the 2 sisters, overhearing the conversation, which you'll see. Blanche tells her that her fix is worse than hers, only you're not being sensible about it. "I'm going to do something," she says, "get hold of myself and make myself a new life." "Yes," asks Stella, "but now you've given in, and that isn't right. You're not old. You can get out." So we're coming to another one of these contrasting statements between the 2 sisters. Blanche tells Stella that she can get out, and Stella notices the stage direction, slowly and emphatically states, "I'm not in anything I want to get out of." Nice little moment between the sisters in the middle of this scene. "What, Stella?" "I said I am not in anything that I have a desire to get out of. Look at the mess in this room," switches the subject. "And those empty bottles. They went through 2 cases last night. He promised this morning that he was going to quit having these poker parties, but you know how long such a promise is going to keep." "Oh well, it's his pleasure," she says. "Like mine is movies and bridge." And here's maybe the statement which encapsulates Stella's spirit of pragmatism and compromise. She declares, "People have got to tolerate each other's habits, I guess." "I don't understand you." Stella turns towards her. "I don't understand your indifference," says Blanche. "Is this a Chinese philosophy you've cultivated?" she asks jokingly. "Is what? This shuffling about and mumbling, 1 tube smashed beer bottles mess in the kitchen, as if nothing out of the ordinary has happened." Stella laughs uncertainly, and picking up the broom, twirls it in her hands. "Are you deliberately shaking that thing in my face?" asks Blanche. "No." "Stop it," says Blanche. "Let go of that broom. I won't have you cleaning up for him." Then who's going to do it? Are you? I? I? No, I didn't think so. Oh, let me think. If only my mind would function. We've got to get hold of some money. That's the way out. I guess that money is always nice to get hold of. Listen to me. I have an idea of some kind, says Blanche. Shakily, she twists a cigarette into her holder. Do you remember Shep Huntley? Stella shakes her head. Of course you remember Shep Huntley. I went out with him at college and wore his pin for a while. Well? The likelihood in this play is that Shep Huntley is a fabrication or a creation of Blanche's mind. At this moment in the scene, Blanche utilises upon Shep Huntley as a figure of escape. She'll give us some information about Shep Huntley, but Blanche believes that the only way that the two sisters can get out of the situation that they're currently in is through getting hold of some money, as she says at the top of the page. And she's going to get hold of that money via Shep Huntley, a Texas millionaire whom allegedly Blanche once dated at college and wore his pin. I ran into him last winter, says Blanche. You know, I went to Miami during the Christmas holidays. Again, the story sounds far-fetched, and we're likely being invited to believe that this is either a delusion of Blanche's, or Blanche is just lying out of desperation. No. Well, I did. I took the trip as an investment, says Blanche, thinking I'd meet someone with $1 million. Did you? Yes. I ran into Shep Huntley. I ran into him on Biscayne Boulevard on Christmas Eve about dusk, getting into his car. A Cadillac, apparently. Must have been a block long. I should think that would have been inconvenient in traffic, exclaims Stella, making light of it. Stella's sort of joking nature here, I think, implies that she understands that Blanche is likely exaggerating this or entirely constructing this event. You've heard of oil wells? Yes, remotely. He has them all over Texas. Texas is literally spouting gold in his pockets. So here's this notion of Shep Huntley, this Texas millionaire, who has oil wells all over Texas and a Cadillac convertible a block long that allegedly Blanche has dated and run into, a construction of her mind, perhaps an indicator of her ideal when it comes to masculinity and a man. My, says Stella. You know how indifferent I am to money, says Blanche. I think of money in terms of what it does for you, but he could do it. He could certainly do it. Do what, Blanche? Why, set us up in a shop. What kind of shop? Oh, a shop of some kind. He could do it with half of what his wife throws away at the races. He's married? Honey, would I be here if the man weren't married? Stella laughs a little. Blanche suddenly springs up and crosses to the phone. She speaks shrilly. How do I get Western Union? Operator? Western Union. That's a dial phone, honey. Just a little moment in the play which reiterates to you that Blanche is of this slightly older world. You know, she's not aware that the phone here, you have to dial the number. There won't just be an operator on the other side of the phone. The world in which Blanche grew up is no longer the world in which the events of this play take place. I can't dial, I'm to just dial 0. Yes. O for operator, even. Blanche considers a moment, then she puts the phone down. Give me a pencil. Where is the slip of paper? I've got to write it down first, the message, I mean. She goes to the dressing table and grabs up a sheet of Kleenex and an eyebrow pencil for writing equipment. Let me see now. She bites the pencil. Darling Shep, sister and I in desperate situation. I beg your pardon, exclaims Stella, and what Stella is exclaiming at here is this notion of being in a desperate situation. So again, it's the contrast between the two sisters, and Blanche has concocted this fantasy where she can write to this Texas millionaire and ask for some cash to try and save her and her sister from the plight that she perceives them as being privy to, whereas Stella, of course, doesn't see it the same way. Sister and I in desperate situation. We'll explain details later. Would you be interested in... She bites the pencil again. Would you be interested in... She smashes the pencil on the table and springs up. You never get anywhere with direct appeals, exclaims Blanche. Don't be so ridiculous, darling. But I'll think of something. I've got to think of something. Don't laugh at me, Stella. Please, please don't. I want you to look at the contents of my purse. Here's what's in it. She snatches her purse open. 65 measly cents in coin of the realm. Stanley doesn't give me a regular allowance. He likes to pay the bills himself. But this morning he gave me $10 to smooth things over. You take 5 of it, Blanche, and I'll keep the rest. So, 2 things we could say about this. The first thing here, to that point earlier about Stella being dependent on Stanley, he doesn't give me a regular allowance, he pays the bills himself. So in other words, Stella is financially dependent on Stanley. She has no financial independence. As the breadwinner of the household, Stanley Kowalski, who arrives symbolically in scene 1 throwing the bleeding package of meat up to his wife. You learn here that he doesn't give Stella a regular allowance, meaning if Stella needs anything financial, she has to ask Stanley for it. So that's an interesting detail with regards to the characterization of their relationship. The second point here is he gave her $10 to euphemistically smooth things over. So out of guilt or shame, Stanley has felt compelled to give Stella money this morning, $10, maybe to reiterate her worth to him. And Stella now wants to share this money with Blanche, who has only 65 cents in her purse. Oh no, no, Stella. I know how it helps your morale just having a little pocket money on you. No, thank you. I'll take to the streets, exclaims Blanche. Talk sense. How do you happen to get so low on funds? Money just goes. It goes places. And this conceit of Blanche rubbing her forehead, she does this all the way through the play. Anytime we have psychological confusion or trauma, anything tragic in Blanche's life, as a motif, she tends to rub her head. Sometime today, I've got to get hold of a bromo. I'll fix you one now. Not yet. I've got to keep thinking. I wish you'd just let things go, at least for a while. Stella, I can't live with him, exclaims Blanche. You can. He's your husband. But how could I stay here with him after last night, with just those curtains between us? Blanche, you saw him at his worst last night. And Blanche fires back, I saw him at his best. So you can see here that Blanche has already turned Stanley into the antagonist of her life and sees no redeeming features in his character, whereas Stella continues to defend Stanley and protect him. You saw him at his worst last night. I saw him at his best, exclaims back Blanche. What such a man has to offer is animal force. And he gave a wonderful exhibition of that. But the only way to live with such a man is to go to bed with him. And that's your job, not mine. So again, Blanche comments on the most attractive feature in Stanley's personality. What he has to offer, in other words, is his animal force. And animal joy being in all aspects of his bearing. Animal joy is a phrase given to us in stage direction in the first scene of the play. And now Blanche comments on Stanley's animal force. And the notion that the only way to live with such a man is to go to bed with him. So in other words, the only way in which you can reconcile a life with a man who only has to offer animal force is to sexually satisfy him. So in terms of how Blanche sees Stanley, in this sequence, you get this notion that she sees him as quite a primal, sort of almost like she'll use phrases like ape-like. She sees him as a primal, primitive, visceral, hyper-masculine tyrant. After you rest a little, you'll see it's going to work out. You don't have to worry about anything while you're here. I mean, expenses, says Stella. I have a plan for us both, to get us both out. And again, you take it for granted that I am in something I want to get out of. So you have 4 or 5 examples, I think, all the way throughout this scene of the ways in which the two sisters view the same situation and the same male character differently. I have a plan to get us out. You take it for granted that I am in something that I want to get out of. I take it for granted, says Blanche, that you still have sufficient memory of Belle Reeve to find this place and these poker players impossible to live with. Well, you're taking entirely too much for granted. I can't believe you're in earnest. No, I understand how it happened a little. You saw him in uniform, an officer not here, but I'm not sure it would have made any difference where I saw him. Now, don't say it was one of those mysterious electrical things between people. If you do, I'll laugh in your face. So what Blanche is arguing here is that Stella has been duped by Stanley, and that Stella once upon a time saw Stanley in his uniform as an officer and attributed misplaced, let's say, dignity and honour to his character. In other words, that Stanley had tricked Stella into thinking that he was much more honourable and decent than he actually is. Stella, of course, is not attracted to that part of Stanley's character. So when she says, I'm not sure it would have made any difference where I saw him, in other words, saying the only thing that mattered was that I did see him, and this notion that she's just attracted to Stanley in a sort of almost irrational way, and that's the driving force of their relationship. And Blanche says, funnily enough, don't say it's one of those mysterious electric things between people. If you do, I'll laugh in your face. She's trying to get to this notion of don't just say that you're attracted to him because you're attracted to him. Don't just say it's out of love or lust, because I'll laugh in your face if you do. I'm not going to say anything more about it at all. All right, then don't. And a key quotation for Stella in this play, which goes to the heart of her relationship with Stanley. There are things that happen between a man and a woman, notably euphemistically in the dark, that sort of make everything else seem unimportant. And that single quotation encapsulates, I think, everything which we have said about the dynamic between Stanley and Stella, and Stanley's drive, which thrills Stella. And there's a pause. And this is followed by a key quotation by Blanche. What you're talking about is brutal desire, just desire. The name of that rattletrap streetcar, and the name of this play, that bangs through the quarter, up one old narrow street and down the other. Haven't you ever ridden on that streetcar? Asked Stella. It brought me here, where I'm not wanted and where I'm ashamed to be. So, I think it's a really excellent exchange in this play between the two sisters on the central theme of desire. Blanche is warning Stella and advising her, cautionary in her dialogue, against the nature and problematic consequences of pursuing a relationship purely predicated on desire, or as she calls it, brutal desire. Brutal is an interesting adjective. Brutal has those connotations of something which is primal and primitive, visceral, inherent to your sort of emotional makeup. And Stella asks her back, have you never ridden metaphorically on that streetcar? Have you never followed desire? And Blanche just replies tersely with, it brought me here. And I think that shows you that there is some recognition in Blanche's character that as a result of her desire, sexual desire, she's been brought to a complicated and problematic stage of her life. then don't you think your superior attitude is a bit out of place? I'm not feeling at all superior, Stella. Believe me, I'm not. It's just this. This is how I look at it. A man like that, Stanley, is someone to go out with once, twice, 3 times when the devil is in you. But live with. Have a child by. I have told you I love him. Then I tremble for you. I just tremble for you. I can't help your trembling if you insist on trembling. I love him. I tremble for you. And there's a pause. Okay, and we go into the final sequence of this scene with the conceit of Stanley hidden on stage like a Shakespearean villain. Indeed, like Othello, overhearing a conversation and creating dramatic irony for the rest of the play. We, the audience, know that Stanley is privy to everything which Blanche says about him in this following sequence. May I speak plainly? Yes. Go ahead, as plainly as you want. Outside, a train approaches. They are silent till the noise subsides. They are both in the bedroom. Under cover of the train's noise, Stanley enters from outside. He stands unseen by the women, holding some packages in his arms, and overhears their following conversation. He wears an undershirt and grease-stained seersucker pants. Okay. So I will just highlight in green everything that's significant about Stanley. And it begins with first accusation in exclamation. If you forgive me, he's common. Why, yes, I suppose he is. Suppose. You can't have forgotten that much of our bringing up, Stella, that you suppose any part of a gentleman's in his nature. Not one particle, no. Oh, if he were just ordinary, just plain but good and wholesome, but no. There's something downright bestial about him. Something animal-like about him. He doesn't have any part of a gentleman's nature. He's common. He acts like an animal. Has an animal's habits. Eats like one. Moves like one. Talks like one. There's even something subhuman. Something not quite at the stage of humanity yet. Yes, something ape-like about him, like one of those pictures I've seen in anthropological studies. Thousands and thousands of years have passed him right by, and there he is, Stanley Kowalski, survivor of the Stone Age, bearing the raw meat home from the kill in the jungle, ironically and symbolically linking to scene 1. And you here, waiting for him. So let's put this in yellow for Stella. So she switches now, you to Stella, here, waiting for him. Maybe he'll strike you, or maybe he'll grunt and kiss you. That is, if kisses have been discovered yet. Night falls and the other apes gather. There, in front of the cave, all grunting like him, swilling, gnawing, hulking. His poker night, you call it, this party of apes. Somebody growls, some creature snatches at something. The fight is on. God, maybe we are a long way from being made in God's image, Stella. But Stella, my sister, there has been some progress since then. That's hilarious. We are a long way from the Stone Age, but there has been some progress since then. Such things as art, poetry, music, such kinds of new light have come into the world. In some kinds of people, some tenderer feelings have had some little beginning that we have got to make grow and cling to and hold our flag in this dark march toward wherever it is approaching. Don't hang back with the brutes. So, this entire speech, this particular sequence in the play. It's a nice place to turn to if you're looking at Blanche's criticisms of Stanley, which extend from him being common, so a class-based criticism, straight through to his behaviour, his physical actions and mannerisms. She describes him as subhuman and ape-like. She comments on the verbs grunting, swilling, gnawing and hulking. It seems to be as much an attack on Stanley's character and background and class status as it is actual outright contempt and hatred for Stanley and everything that he represents. She sees him as a survivor of the Stone Age, primitive man in a modern setting, an antagonist, and there's 10 pieces of evidence here that you can use. At the same time, she criticizes Stella for being here waiting for him, that Stella has made herself almost has self-objectified herself as a sexual plaything for this brute, and that she'll either be strucken by him, maybe he'll strike you, or maybe grunt and kiss you. So this notion that they are the two things which Stanley can do to Stella. And he has overheard this, so dramatic irony has been established. And funnily enough, in the stage direction, he hesitates, he licks his lips outside. He's overheard this. And suddenly he turns stealthily about and withdraws through the front door. The women are unaware of his presence. When the train has passed, he calls through the closed front door. Hey, Stella. Stella, who has listened gravely to Blanche, Stanley. Now, a lot of students miss this. It's in the stage direction. She's listened gravely to Blanche. So whilst Blanche is on this kind of tirade of contemptuous criticism towards Stanley, Stella is listening gravely. And I would posit to you that what this implies, and if you were to analyse that stage direction of her listening gravely to Blanche, is that there is something which resonates with Stella as true about the statements which Blanche is making. There is some truth to this criticism, and I think Stella recognises it, but before she can actually comment on it, Stanley comes into the flat. But Stella has gone to the front door. Stanley enters casually with his packages. Hiya, Stella. Blanche back? Yes, she's back. Hiya, Blanche. He grins at her. You must have gotten under the car. Them damn mechanics at Fritz's don't know their arses from. Hey. Stella has embraced him with both arms, fiercely and full in the view of Blanche. He laughs and clasps her head to him. Over her head, he grins through the curtains at Blanche. So, she's gone from listening gravely to Blanche to embracing him fiercely in the full view of Blanche. And I think that this brutal desire, which Blanche warned about earlier in the scene, manifests itself here at the end of the scene. In spite of hearing what she seemed to recognise as some valid comments about Stanley's nature, at the end of this scene, Stella still rushes back fiercely into an embrace with her husband Stanley. Stanley, meanwhile, characterised as grinning twice at Blanche. As the light fades away, with a lingering brightness on their embrace, the music of the blue piano, so a reminder, the motif of New Orleans, this modern world, the music of the blue piano and trumpet and drums is heard.